Hello and welcome to Always Bored, Never Boring. When I started running this channel, I never realised how many cool people would send in gifts. I mean, really generous gifts. Such shows of generosity are always welcome, and often make it possible for me to showcase a game I might not otherwise have been able to. That is the case with Jaws of the Lion, the more accessible sibling of the mighty Gloomhaven, which was kindly sent to me by viewer Nick Graney and his son Finley. A huge thank you to them for making this video possible. Gloomhaven, for the 0.1% of people who don't know, is a tactical dungeon crawling campaign with legacy elements for 1 to 4 players. It's one of those games that I always wanted to try, because you just have to. It's a modern classic, a beloved title. You aren't a true dungeon crawling fan if you haven't given it a go. But I was reluctant to buy it, because I just knew it wasn't going to be for me. Not if I was being honest with myself. I tend to lean towards more streamlined games. I don't want to have to deal with thick rules books and hundreds of counters and cards. I find it difficult to play through games with huge campaigns, and I don't really like legacy mechanisms. Secrets are fine, envelopes and boxes to open, but I am turned off by anything that permanently alters the condition of a game, like applying stickers to a map or ripping up cards. And so, while there was always a little part of me that wanted to play Gloomhaven, that part, the little rogue part clutching at shiny things, would always be overpowered by the much more sensible and grounded part of me who is in charge of the hobby budget. You don't mess with him. He's mean. Then, in 2020, Jaws of the Lion came out, and almost changed everything. Jaws of the Lion is Gloomhaven, but in a more manageable format. A smaller box with less tokens and cards, a book of hex-based maps for the tactical combats instead of map tiles, and a new campaign with scenarios that gradually introduce the core game mechanisms. And all, of course, at a significantly cheaper price point. I still didn't think I was going to like it. If you peered past the jewels, the heart of the game was still Gloomhaven. Still that same grand and intricate system that I wasn't convinced I would connect with. But this new package was directly addressing a number of my concerns, and suddenly Gloomhaven started to feel like a more realistic proposition for me. And then I was contacted by Nick and Finley. They were offering to send their copy to me so I could review it on the channel. And that was that. You don't look a gift lion in the jewels. I received the game, set aside some time with my daughter, and we eagerly dived into the adventure. On the first night, we played through the first mission, which is a very simple tutorial. The next night we played the second mission. The night after that, we played mission 3. The night after that, we played mission 4. The night after that, we played mission 4. The night after that, we played mission 4. The night after that, we used the rules to make the game a bit easier, and we played mission 4. And guess what? I don't like it. Actually, that's not true. I like the idea of it. I marvel at the design of it. On an intellectual level, I admire it. I just didn't enjoy it. Or rather, I did enjoy it until I didn't. Make no mistakes, this game is a work of genius, and it's obvious why it's held in such high regard. I would say it's stupidly good, but it's not. It's cleverly good. It's busy yet meticulous and precise. But it's not a lion. It is not a thing of heart and sinew and muscle. It has nothing of messy biology about it. This is a machine. A construct of nested mechanisms, interlinked cogs with sharp teeth that constantly churn in an attempt to draw you into the depths of the game's maze-like structure. If they bite you, if they get a good hold, you could be lost in that maze for a very long time. And it did almost get me. Those mechanical jewels drew blood, but I recoiled when they started to chew. You see, what Jaws of the Lion does, which is so very clever, is hold your hand and step you through the layers of the mechanisms one at a time. It carefully adds something new with each adventure you undertake, and for the first 2 missions, I was absolutely along for the ride. Even in the third mission, I was still holding on. But then, we hit scenario 4. And I admit, this review has been a long time in the works, simply because I didn't know the best way to approach it. Even this bite-sized slice of Gloomhaven, this sampler platter, is too big, too dense to discuss the rules and gameplay in any kind of meaningful way. More importantly, my inability to connect with the mechanisms was more my failing than a failing of the games. And how am I going to smack talk about something so masterfully executed as Gloomhaven? It is not exactly a sacred cow, but it's almost as close as it's possible for any board game to be. It is rightfully beloved, and if you care about such things, it holds the number 3 spot on Board Game Geek's list of highest ranked games, while Jaws of the Lion is number 10. And in case you were wondering, the standalone sequel Frosthaven is number 25. All that considered, I decided the best way to review this game was for me to focus on how it attempts to onboard players, as that is a primary function of this particular offering. So let's take a look at what it does right, how it almost worked for me, and why it ultimately failed. Jaws of the Lion is very aware of what Gloomhaven is, and what the barriers to entry are, and it efficiently dismantles those barriers with impeccable skill. This is primarily achieved through the Learn to Play guide, supplemented by a glossary that completely replaces the traditional rules book. The idea here is you read the first page of the guidebook, and then you set up your first game and start playing. You learn on the fly, with each new scenario serving as a way of delivering additional layers of rules. And this is, honestly, about as good as it gets. I have seen several games attempt to teach through play using tutorials, but only twice have I seen it done perfectly, in Legends of Andor and here in Jaws of the Lion. The guidebook directs you to immediately read page 1 of the scenario book, where you get your first taste of the narrative style, which is serviceable. I wouldn't say this is grand storytelling, but it's efficient, unfussy storytelling. It sets the scene, it laces the adventure with mysteries, it's engaging, and it's surprisingly funny at times. Listen to this introduction. It will be good to get back to the Sleeping Lion. After a fortnight going up and down the Still River, chasing a bad lead on a missing blacksmith, you can almost feel the warmth of the inn's hearth when Gloomhaven's walls come into view. You are almost home. To be fair, it's not just the blacksmith. An alarming number of people within the poorer districts of the city have gone missing. Usually, nothing comes of it though, just another poor soul forgotten out here on the edge of civilization. The blacksmith's wife, Sandy, however, managed to somehow scrape enough money together to hire you to find her husband. You're not sure where the money came from, but no matter the source, it couldn't have come easy, which makes it doubly painful to return to the city empty-handed. True, Sandy was a little light on the payment, but you are the Jaws of the Lion, one of the most well-known mercenary groups in this backwater dump of a town. Surely it can't hurt to take a charity case every once in a while. Getting good jobs is about maintaining a reputation after all, which is why you really need to get to the bottom of this and not return to the widow with nothing but the calluses on your feet. Also, you probably shouldn't call her a widow to her face, at least not until the fate of the blacksmith has been confirmed. Given, however, that none of those who disappeared have returned, the outlook is grim. As these cheery thoughts pass through your mind, you notice movement up ahead and immediately draw your weapon. The sun has dipped low in the sky, reducing visibility, but you can clearly see some ramshackle wooden barriers blocking the road in front of you. And sure enough, as you cautiously approach the scene, vermlings jump out from behind the obstructions, flashing crude swords and sharp sticks. You have to admit, you are quite tired from the day's journey. But still, these oversized rats certainly picked the wrong group of travellers to ambush today. You are the Jaws of the Lion, after all, and you are always ready to show there is only one outcome for anyone who dares to threaten you. Having read this, it's back to the guidebook, where you are first taught how to add an adventure to your map. The game does have some secrets, miniatures tucked away in small boxes, but the map with the stickers is the main component of the game's legacy aspects. As you unlock adventures, you add the locations to your map, and then you mark them as completed when you finish them, or mark them as blocked if your choices make them unavailable. Next, it's time to select your player character. There are 4 in the box, and despite unusual names and appearances, they fall roughly into the traditional classes of Fighter, Tank, Ranger, and Support Spellcaster. I took on the role of the Red Guard, a specialist in protection and monster manipulation. My daughter, surprising me not in the slightest, adopted the role of the Chaotic Demolitionist, a monkey man with a brace of bombs and a mechanically powered punch. That meant the Hatchet, a ranged specialist who likes loot, and the Void Warden, a healer, were left to sit out the adventure. Each of these heroes has their own character mat, a dial for tracking health and experience, a starting hand of 6 basic ability cards, look for the letter A at the top of the cards, a deck of smaller combat cards, an initiative token, a handful of tracker tokens, and a paper sheet for recording progress through the campaign. It's already quite a lot to keep track of, and it's only going to get worse. Then you need to set up the play area for the first scenario, in which our heroes pummel some rat men who have got between them and the pub. Arguably one of the best ways to start any adventure. Jaws of the Lion simplifies the setup process by using a scenario book. Open it to the correct page and half the work is already done. You just need to add the monsters and other tokens. Some later scenarios also require the supplemental book, which has additional maps that you attach to the scenario book to make larger dungeons. Pretty clever stuff. With that done, you just need to read a couple of pages of rules and you are on your way, and that is just excellent. This first tutorial keeps things as simple as possible. Each hero only has 6 ability cards, and those cards are much more straightforward and easy to understand than the cards you will be using later. Additionally, enemies in this scenario are going to have a fixed initiative and will only ever move and then attack in melee. In this manner, players are going to be able to get to grips with the overall flow of the gameplay and the core mechanisms of choosing and using their cards. First, each player will select 2 cards from their hand. When they do this, they are considering 2 distinct things: when they want to activate and what they want to do. Each card has a number in the middle which represents initiative. Of the 2 cards they select, players will pick one to be their initiative value for the round. Lower numbers will activate before higher numbers. Each card also presents 2 actions, or sequences of actions. When a player activates, their character can complete the top action from one of the cards and the bottom action from the other card, in any order. This immediately presents you with delicious decisions. You are already spinning plates, balancing wants and needs, personal preservation and the good of the team. For example, here we have 2 cards from the Hatchet starting deck. Center Mass will let the Hatchet make a ranged attack or move up to 3 spaces. Second Wind will let the Hatchet heal 3 wounds or move up to 5 spaces. If the Hatchet wants to heal, he has to forego attacking this round, as he can't use the top action of both cards. He also forgoes being able to move quickly, as he cannot use 2 actions from the same card. On top of that, he has to pick an initiative value, either 24 or 18. Does he want to select the lower value to activate earlier in the round, or would he rather go a little later in the round after seeing what other players have done? Once players have selected their cards, they reveal their initiative order and arrange their initiative tokens in sequence, adding any tokens for enemies. This is where the rubber hits the road. Sometimes you will be able to carry out the turn exactly as you envisioned it. Other times, the initiative order, moves performed by your allies, or the actions of the monsters will throw the whole turn into disarray, and it becomes more about trying to salvage something useful, anything useful, out of your activation. In this first scenario, turns are pretty straightforward, and you will mainly be moving and attacking. Attacking eschews traditional dice-based mechanisms, and instead each player has their own combat deck, which they will be able to customize over time. When making an attack, you do the base damage listed on the ability card. For Center Mass, the attack will do 3 damage and can be applied to a monster up to 3 spaces away. You then draw the top card of your combat deck. This contains a modifier that is applied to the base damage. And there is also the dreaded null, which cancels out the whole attack. If you are attacking with advantage, you draw 2 cards and keep the best. If you are attacking with disadvantage, you draw 2 cards and keep the worst. The idea of the combat deck is that it helps you to predict your combat results. You only reshuffle the deck after pulling the double damage or the null card, so if you have a good memory, you can keep track of the cards you have used. Additionally, as you level up, you will be able to remove or replace combat cards, gradually smoothing out the odds in your favour. When it's time for monsters to activate, they will focus on a hero. This will generally be the closest hero they can perform their attack on, and monsters resolve attacks using their own combat deck. Any damage on heroes is recorded on their damage dials, and if they hit 0, they are exhausted, meaning they cannot take any further actions in this scenario. If all of the heroes are exhausted at the same time, the heroes lose. Once all heroes and monsters have activated, the heroes discard the 2 cards they selected and a new round begins, where they will select 2 more cards. Of course, they now have less cards to select from. So, what happens when they have no cards left in hand at all? It's time to take a short rest. At the end of any round in which a hero has at least 2 cards in their discard pile, they can take a short rest. They take all of their discarded cards, randomly remove 1 card which is lost for the rest of the current mission, and then they shuffle the rest of those discarded cards back into their hand. This again is another incredibly well thought out mechanism, because it adds another choice where a benefit is offset by a significant risk. You can rest at the end of most turns, and indeed you must rest if you have less than 2 cards in your hand, and resting lets you reclaim good cards you would like to use again. However, in doing so, you must remove 1 card from play. Not only is there a chance you will lose a really strong card, you are also reducing the total number of cards you have to play with, and if you are ever in a situation where you are fully rested but still cannot draw 2 cards at the start of a turn, your character is exhausted and you take a dirt nap. In other words, each rest gives you a short-term benefit, but hurts you in the long term by decreasing the number of turns you can remain active in the mission. And that really is brilliant. If you should smash up the little rat men, the guidebook will take you through the next steps, adding another sticker to your map, filling in your character sheets, and importantly, upgrading your ability deck. You get to swap out 2 of your cards marked A for 2 cards marked B. For example, the hatchet will upgrade his center mass ability, so now in addition to moving up to 3 spaces, he can push an adjacent target 2 spaces. With these more complicated versions of basic abilities at your disposal, you can head into Scenario 2. And while I'm not going to spoil anything about the scenarios from this point on, I will briefly cover what they add to the core mechanisms you have already learned. The first big new element is loot. You now have money tokens and treasure tokens on the board, along with some trap tokens. These are incredibly useful, but you have to snatch them during the mission. Any loot tokens left on the board at the end of a mission are lost. It's very gamey, but it does force you to think more carefully about each turn, balancing looting with fighting and working towards your objective, always keeping in mind the ticking clock of your ever diminishing ability card pile. The second new element to consider involves additional ways to use your ability cards, in case you were worried there wasn't already enough to think about. You will notice that each card has a basic attack and a basic move symbol on the left. These are alternative ways to use the cards if you don't want to use the card's actual ability. For example, if the hatchet didn't want to use second wind to heal, he could instead use it to make a strength 2 attack. You will also find there are several ways you can use cards for powerful actions, but at the cost of losing that card for the rest of the mission. Sometimes you will lose a card because the ability on it is just really good. Here on the advanced close cuts card, the hatchet can use the lower ability to move up to 4 spaces and then loot his current space and all adjacent spaces. However, in doing so, he must lose the card for the rest of the mission. And if a hero takes damage, they can also choose to lose cards to negate all of that damage. They can either lose 1 card from their hand or 2 cards from their discard pile. It's very risky, as losing cards reduces the number of rounds a hero can remain active, but it can save their life. The third major addition to the rules is monsters now have ability decks which make their behaviour less predictable. After all heroes have revealed their card selections, you draw the top ability card for each monster type. This determines their initiative for the round and what they are going to do. Complete this second scenario and you are introduced to shopping and equipment that provides a range of new abilities and buffs. You also add 2 level 1 cards to your ability deck, granting you more complicated actions and the ability to stay active for longer before becoming exhausted. It's like reading the Kama Sutra. Then it's on to Scenario 3, where you learn how to earn experience points. In a weird twist, while you will earn a few experience points for completing a scenario, most experience points will come not from killing monsters or completing objectives, but from performing certain actions that have the experience icon on them. For example, if the hatchet chooses the attack action on Power Pitch, he gains 2 experience points, but then loses that card for the rest of the scenario. So yes, earning experience is an active choice, rather than a byproduct of the choices you make. You end up jumping through hoops, because if you want experience, you have to be proactive, potentially giving up other better options. And while that does seem right, you have to do special things to get the experience, it also feels somehow backwards to me. Give me experience points because I killed a monster. Don't give me experience points because I chose not to kill the monster and did handstands in the corner instead. This scenario also introduces action cards that remain in play for a certain number of rounds, monster bonuses that improve their combat prowess, and the long rest, where you can forego your entire turn to heal 2 wounds, refresh any used items, lose 1 card from your discard pile, and then shuffle the rest of your discard pile into your hand. The long rest is a valuable ability, but you are still losing a card, and you are skipping a full turn. In this game, you never feel like you have enough turns as it is. If you complete this scenario, you are taught how to record your experience, and you gain a perk. You select 1 perk from the list on your character sheet, and then modify your combat deck accordingly. Here, I am removing 2 -1 modifier cards, because negative modifiers suck. You are also introduced to city events, which add some much needed colour to interactions between scenarios. And then, the training wheels come off. You remove all of your ability cards marked A and B, and you take all of your cards marked 1. You are a fully fledged level 1 hero, and it's time to play Scenario 4. And here, you are introduced to another wave of new rules, namely battle goals and the element board. The bloody element board. Up to this point, I was doing okay. I was pleasantly surprised. Jaws of the Lion had been fun, engaging. The tutorials had made it easy to learn, the scenarios had been enjoyable, we had been progressing through the campaign at a decent clip. And then we reached Scenario 4. This is where the game lost me. It added just 1 too many layers and spiked the difficulty just enough to pivot the game away from a fun dungeon romp into a stodgy, painful slog, where the slightest misstep resulted in mission failure. So close. And the worst thing was, I just didn't feel the new additions added anything other than busy work. Decisions for the sake of decisions. Immersion-breaking tangents to the superb core gameplay. Battle goals are egregious intrusions on the theme and feel incredibly gamey. At the start of each scenario, players are each dealt 2 battle goals and they must select 1. If they complete the scenario and achieve the battle goal, they gain a check mark. Every time they gain 3 check marks, they gain a perk to modify their combat deck. These battle goals are so odd and out of place. It doesn't make any sense why a hero would even attempt to undertake them, and often they work on a meta level, which is going to lead to heroes doing things that are out of character, which impede the performance of the team, or which puts the whole mission in jeopardy. You may have to collect a money token with the loot action, while standing adjacent to 2 or more monsters. You may have to make sure you never end your turn adjacent to any other heroes, or make sure you end each turn adjacent to a wall or obstacle, or ensure you kill the first monster in the scenario. Looking at it purely from a gameplay perspective, you can see what these goals are bringing to the game. They are personal objectives and you will be rewarded for completing them, but it sure does feel like more stuff piled on more stuff for the sake of having more stuff. And then there's the element board. You set this out at the start of the scenario, placing fire, ice, air, earth, light and dark tokens on the inert column. A lot of your action cards will now have element symbols on them, and this lets you interact with the matching element tokens on the board because you didn't already have enough to think about. Here on the Hatchet's double throw ability, we can see the air symbol. If you use this ability, you infuse the battlefield with air, or something. Whatever the narrative explanation, the mechanical resolution is that at the end of your turn, you move the air token to the strong column of the element board. At the end of the round, if a token is in the strong or waning column, it moves 1 column to the left until eventually it's inert again. And the point of this additional bookkeeping? Well, sometimes an ability will give you the chance to gain an additional benefit by using an element token if it is in the strong or waning position of the element board. For example, on the Hatchet's follow-through card, when you select the movement option, you can use wind to make an additional move of 2 spaces after the push action. And yes, you heard me right, using wind after a push results in a movement. No wonder the ability is called follow through. You might want to activate the fire token after to burn your trousers. And that still isn't the end of the new rules. After scenario 4 you will learn about bosses, leveling up, increasing the level of your enemies and more. But I never progressed much beyond this point, because the 4th scenario, arguably the first real taste of the full game experience, really ramps up the challenge, showcasing how brilliantly balanced on the knife edge the level designs are, and also showcasing how flawlessly you need to plan and execute your turns. Sadly, that just didn't work for me and my daughter, and for different reasons. I started to find the game a bit too much of a chore, tracking all the different statuses and the elements on the board, plotting my moves, carefully working through the permutations. It was so obviously necessary to analyse the options with care, and it all started to feel a bit too much like work, lacking the immediacy and punch that I always find so compelling in a game. Conversely, my daughter is a chaos goblin. She throws herself into games playing by the seat of her pants. She likes to go for it, caution be damned, and you can't play Jaws of the Lion that way. She completely tanked multiple playthroughs with her recklessness, and eventually we had to dial down the difficulty for her. Even then, we were scraping through scenarios and it just stopped being fun. The mechanisms in this game are superb. They are so clever and they plug together in a way that is joyous to behold. But there's just a bit too much of it, and everything is just a bit too particular. When you are looking at your hand of cards, trying to balance initiative order with 2 different actions you want to take, while also trying to make sure you can land on a loot space on the board, while also worrying about refreshing an element on the element board to boost an ally's attack, while also trying to complete an arbitrary battle goal like having exactly 5 cards in your discard pile when the mission ends, and, well, I stopped feeling like a hero on an adventure. I start feeling like an accountant balancing the books, or a project manager trying to hit a particularly tight deadline. For some people, clearly for many people, this is going to be an amazing experience, but it's not the experience I am looking for from an adventure game. I said earlier in the review that this game isn't a lion, it's a machine, and for me that is a problem. It's too immaculate, too pristine and precise, too dry. I guess I like my games a bit chaotic, a bit scrappy. I don't mind if they're a bit rough around the edges, and I want something that speaks to my heart as much as it speaks to my head. Jaws of the Lion feels almost clinical, and that just hasn't worked for me. I want to tear into an adventure with teeth and claws. I don't want to dissect it with a scalpel. And yet, for all that precision, for all the analysis paralysis inducing decisions, there is still randomness laced into those mechanisms. Not a lot, it's just a dash in the soup, but it's enough to sometimes leave a bad taste. When you spend time orchestrating the perfect sequence of actions only to draw the null card when you attack, it feels like wasted time and energy, and for me at least, feels more unfair than a bad dice roll. Yes, this is by design, and it is less random than dice. If you count your cards and have a good memory, you will know when you have pulled your whiffs and have an improved chance of a big hit. But I don't know, if the game is going to make my brain work this hard, I would prefer something a bit more deterministic to make it feel like there has been real value in my decision making process. I know, I am complaining when the game gives me too much control over my actions, and I'm complaining when it doesn't give me enough. Sometimes you just can't catch a break. And so Jaws of the Lion joins the list of brilliant games that I feel bad for not liking more. Ah well, at least I know for sure now. Thank you once again to Nick and Finley for sending this game to me. I hope you both enjoyed the review and it was worth the terribly long wait. And of course, a huge thanks to all of you for watching. If you like the video, please consider pressing the like button. If you really like the video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so, and hopefully I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.